Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we'll be diving into the second episode of The Chosen, titled Shabbat. Kenrith 984 BC. Kenrith in Hebrew, or in the Bible first should I say, is both a city and a lake. And it's known as the Sea of Kenrith, but in the Bible it's more written or recognized as the Sea of Galilee. Now, you know me, I like to take things into its original context. In this case, the original language in Hebrew, Kenrith is a significant, or it signifies harp. And it's also very interesting that the shape of the sea, or the lake, should we call it, is in the form of a harp. And of course, again, since we roughly estimate that in the year 984 BC is either in the time of King David or Solomon, if it is in the time of King David, this sort of Easter egg connection of the harp-shaped lake and of course the instrument of choice of David. Then we jump forward to the year 26 AD to the city of Capernaum, where we get to see Mary in her new life, healed and joyous spirit, or vibe should we call it. Now, Yusuf, who was one of the people present at the time where Nicodemus tried to do an exorcism on her, sees her and recognizes her. And without any doubt, or should I say with any delay, runs back for what we can assume is to tell Nicodemus. Now, I didn't mention this beforehand in the previous episode, but the math makes sense to a certain point. Many scholars believe that Jesus was born either between the 3rd or the 5th year before Christ, and we all know for sure he died on the 31st year. Now, of course, this is a very confusing topic, and many people speculate he was born in many seasons, different years, but we know for sure when he died, when his ministry started, and this is approximately roughly he's starting his ministry. At this point in the show, he's already baptized, he's already had the temptation, and he's just starting his ministry. And of course, the healing of Mary is found in the book of Luke in chapter 8, verse 2, where it mentions her by name. Then we go back to Matthew and Gaius, who are looking to have an audience with the praetor Quintus. Of course, this is really where we left off in the previous episode when Simon told Matthew that he had made a deal with Quintus, so their debts were alright, okay. Of course, Matthew being the speculative person he is, Gaius, of course, advising him against it, because why waste time on such a tiny little topic? But Matthew, no, persists on, and when he gets the chance, he tells him right away that, is it true? And Quintus, of course, cuts it very short and says,
his debts are forgiven. Surprise.
Ending it right there and then. Matthew, not satisfied, continues on that, how about did he forgive his brother's debt? Quintus pauses for a sec and says,
yes, forgiven.
Now Matthew keeps insisting and tells him that it was a bad idea to even consider or even put Simon to a task like this. And again, this would be contradicting the praetor's decision. Quintus isn't mad and doesn't follow with the order of punishing them. He speaks or points out the boldness and bravery Matthew has, and that, ironically, is something that is searched for people who join the Roman army. Then Matthew answers in a way saying, I am sane. In a way saying that I'm not that of a fool to join the Roman army. But Quintus snaps back, saying,
A very different kind of sane.
Which plays into the broader idea of the interpretation of normalcy. So you see, normal can be interpreted in many perspectives, and it's not one single thing. For me, something can be normal, to others it could be abnormal. So in this case, it's alluding to that. Now, Matthew suggests and really brings up what I mentioned in the previous episode about Leviticus, that it would
be highly unusual for Jewish men to betray one another.
And Quintus points out, well, you in theory have done that.
So says the Jew who collects taxes from them.
Boom. Roasted.
And of course, we end up that Quintus gives Matthew a special mission because he recognizes his keen skills of observation. Now, of course, we go back to Simon and Andrew, who are in that tavern, and we see Simon try to win over the other fishermen who he's willing to turn over to the Romans, of course. And in those, we get to see John and James coming in. And here's an important detail that I would like to get out of the way right away. The actor that does James in the first 4 episodes, I believe, is one actor. Then for the rest of the episodes of the season, it's another actor. And then for the rest of the other seasons, it's another third actor. And hopefully it stays that way. So I'm going to mention the first actor that we get to see here. And his name is Cheyenne Sobian. And then the next actor who does it for the other half of this first season is Cayenne Sovian. And then for the final second season, third season, fourth season, fifth season that I know of, and hopefully the last 2 seasons of The Chosen, it is Abe Bueno Jaled. And this guy knows Spanish. I can tell by the middle of his name. And of course, during interviews, he does speak Spanish fluently.
Acciones que hacemos indican un poquito más de la fe de nuestros personajes, pero también no perder la fe a través de todo lo que nos está pasando.
And since we're in the topic of talking about actors portraying certain characters, the one who's portraying John in the show is called George H. Thanatos. And in my opinion, immaculate casting at this point. The guy does the job perfectly. Of course, like usual, Andrew really looks at his brother and says, I can't believe it. Are you happy for doing this? For really just betraying your own people? But Simon really tries to justify his actions, saying that the people he really just cares about is Eden, his wife, and Andrew, of course, his brother. It's a personal sacrifice he is willing to go through. It doesn't matter if the other people are collateral damage. Then we shift back to Nicodemus, who is actually interrupted by Shemuel, the other character introduced in the previous episode, which he tells him that he has been summoned from the Sanhedrin of Capernaum. And he uses this Hebrew title, which is Av Bit Din, which stands for Father of the Court. Of course, this title is either meaning a vice president or a high-ranking official in the court of the Sanhedrin in Capernaum, of course. Of course, the summoning is how we believe it. Yusuf informed the Sanhedrin instead of Nicodemus first. Doesn't matter, now Nicodemus knows. And Yusuf informs Nicodemus that the woman, in this case Mary, that he tried to heal is healed.
You saw her?
Yes, teacher.
Nicodemus, justifiably so, is surprised and inquires if it is the same woman, which Yusuf of course tells him it is, but Nicodemus doesn't really believe it yet, but he wants to believe it. And so instead of letting the Sanhedrin publicly announce it that there was, should we call it, a successful exorcism, Nicodemus pleads, or asks in this case, he doesn't plead, to give him more time to investigate the situation.
I would like to investigate the sighting myself.
Because to be honest, he doesn't believe it himself. And of course, in this show's old-fashioned way, it keeps jumping between different stories, and we jump back to Peter and Andrew, who are observing in the night all the ships, or should I say the many fishing boats that are coming in and out. And of course, Simon is trying to investigate who is more likely to go fishing out on Shabbat. Andrew, of course, is accompanying him, but he really starts to really bash Simon for this idea. He even says, I hope this is a plan for you to double-cross the Romans, which to be honest is something I thought as well, Andrew. But Simon has really decided to go through with this. And again, this is creative liberty, but it also builds up how if a human being is pushed to a corner in desperation, like he says in the previous episode, people do things that they never thought imaginable. And of course, we jump back to Nicodemus, who finds Mary, and in his desperation for answers, he calls her by her previous name.
Lilith.
Of course, she is clearly unsettled by this, and so Nicodemus switches his form to talk to her in more of an inquiry method. Of course, Nicodemus thinks that really his sort of a part in the exorcism worked, but Mary actually corrects him, that it really wasn't him, but someone else.
It wasn't anything you did.
Ooh, that's gotta hurt.
When Nicodemus presses to know the identity of the person who healed her, Mary uses these profound and strong words. The time for man has not yet come. This reflects both her transformation and the idea of divine timing, setting the stage for Nicodemus's spiritual journey that later on we get to see at roughly, I believe, as the 7th or 8th episode. Then we switch back to Peter and we have this serious conversation between him and Eden, because of course Simon's actions are actually spiraling his own self-mind, and really he's pushing himself to do something that humanly he knows it's wrong. He's overconfident at this point and he's boasting of his unintelligentness. Of course, Eden pointing this out, hoping that he snaps into reality and knowing that this is a bad idea. And this is actually that really touched me. You see, it's only been 2 episodes, and at the beginning of the first we get to see that he really wants to do this plan, but many people that love him are telling him to go against it. To be honest, of course, if you're desperate, there are things you can do that you never thought possible, but in a way, trusting God would have been another option. Of course, like I said in my previous episode, we wouldn't know what we would be doing or we would have done in the situation of Simon. Of course, now, since we're in a safe spot, we could have said we wouldn't have done it. But of course, later on in the future episodes, we get to see that divine timing, and in those crucial moments where you have to decide one way or another, Simon chooses correctly. Then we turn back to Mary. Of course, from the previous conversation she was having with Nicodemus, she was saying she was getting ready for Shabbat, meaning this episode takes place on the Friday. And we get to see that she's hosting a Shabbat dinner. And in this dinner, we get introductions to more characters of the show. Barnaby, who will be played by Alok Mehta. Shula, played by Ann Baer. Little James, played by Jordan Walker Ross. And then Thaddeus, played by Giovanni Cario. After these characters have entered the establishment, then we get a knock on the door. And of course she didn't expect to have anyone else, and when she opens the door, it's Jesus.
Hello there.
And of course she lets him in. And of course this simple act, or this simple scene, for me it really spoke so much to the connection it has to Revelation chapter 3 verse 20, which says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me." It's a powerful image or illustration of this just simple act of Jesus knocking on the door and being invited in. And of course, in this dinner setting or this celebration setting, it really sits perfectly. And of course, this serves as a formal introduction to Jesus of Nazareth for the audience, and it also inserts this humorous scene of Barnaby saying,
Well, apparently something good can come from Nazareth.
which everyone else takes it as maybe offended, but Jesus just smiles and winks at him. Back then, Nazareth was a small, looked down upon village, and so this joke carries culturally and in a way practically into the context of the time. And of course, we get to see the different situations or feeling, or should I say vibe, between all our characters so far. Mary is so welcomed and so grateful to having Jesus in this sort of big group in her establishment. And we get to see Nicodemus leading a dinner as well. And we get to see Matthew all alone on this Shabbat. And we get to see Andrew, Simon, and Eden. Now, these verses are a reminder of God who created the earth and rested on the Sabbath, signifying that it should be kept holy. Of course, the meaning of holy meaning something set apart, something different. And going back to Simon, he's just really there to maybe not even receive the Sabbath or really just receive it properly. He decides to leave and try to continue, or should I say, go through with the deal he made with Quintus. The episode closes, like I said, him waiting on the shoreline until the Roman soldiers come near him. Of course, he's ready to go through with the deal. And a last reminder that this just shows that Jesus does not choose perfect people. This is just to show how really not perfect any of the disciples were, even the most famous one being Peter, Simon at this point, and that he chooses people that Jesus can work with for their special skills that humanly you can't see. In the show, we've understand Simon being someone who is desperate, who doesn't have faith. Of course, that's alluding to the future of the other seasons, but Jesus can work with us. It doesn't matter who we are, what our past has been, what we've done. And of course, it's just so beautiful that he can choose such broken people to do such magnificent things later on. And definitely this episode really piggybacks on the success for me of the first episode. And so far, I'm loving it. And I can't wait to do the third episode, maybe the first season, and so on and so forth. I really hope that you're excited, and I hope you watch it and see things that maybe I didn't see. And so to end this episode, I'd like to thank you for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next episode.